right, Chapter 9, Muscular System, A and P. Let's get started. So, we're going to start off here by identifying the three different types of muscle tissue, okay? So, the three different types discussed here on this slide are going to be skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is going to be the easiest one for you to remember because it is only found in the heart, hence the cardiac word, okay? So, we'll go back to that one in just a minute. Skeletal muscle, though, I feel like it should be relatively easy to explain as well because it is generally attached to the bone or controlled by the choice of the bone itself. So, cells within skeletal muscle are going to be long and appear very striped or striated with proteins is what that striping is. The functions of skeletal muscle are going to be to move the skeleton, so to move your body, to maintain posture, and to stabilize joints, and produce heat. Some of the same things from the skeletal system, all besides produce heat. The skeletal system had nothing to do with producing heat. So, establishing or maintaining posture, the movements, and then stabilizing joints. All the same of the skeletal system is the skeletal muscle. But in addition to, the skeletal muscles help provide your body with heat. It just makes sense, okay? Smooth muscle. When you're thinking of smooth muscle, you should really think about the linings of a lot of organs, okay? So, or viscera. Another word for organs is going to be viscera. Also, tubes within our body as well, like our ureters down there that deliver urine to our bladder. Also, our esophagus and breathing airways, so our trachea as well, are going to be lined with smooth muscle, okay? So there's bronchiolar, vascular, GI, which is your GI system, is your digestive system. Smooth muscle. These functions of smooth muscle are mainly automatic functions. They happen automatically. They are involuntary, and then they are non-striated, non-striped. Okay? But in going back to cardiac muscle, in between skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle is striped underneath the stethoscope, okay? It appears striated as well. It is found only in the heart. The cells are going to be long and branching, and it fits closely together at many junctions or intercalated discs, okay? And again, is involuntary. So this is going to be an example of a picture from your book here with the three different types of muscles, skeletal, smooth, and cardiac, and how they look underneath a microscope. And then, of course, it is showing you a picture of the location where most of them are as well. So very important, if you want a picture with the words that I just described, this picture is going to be the right one for you. All right, the whole muscle structure itself, okay? The belly of the muscle, if you ever heard that term, the belly of the muscle, this is going to be the main part of the muscle, okay, the fleshy body of the muscle. When I really think about the belly, all muscles have bellies or whatever, but the one I really think about the most is going to be like your calf muscle back here, right, your gastrocnemius is your calf muscle right here. The belly of the muscle right here is going to be the main thickest part of the muscle, right? The thickest part of the muscle. It is going to be attached to slender points at both ends, but the belly is going to be the main part that you think of the muscle itself. Okay? It is composed of thousands of muscle cells that make it up. Within the muscle, there's also something called fascia. Fascia are layers of tough connective tissue that surround the large skeletal muscles. In a way, I think of these layers of fascia kind of being like that periosteum around everything else. That outer layer, that outer protective covering. Your fascia is that protective layer or layers of connective tissue protecting those muscle tissues. Okay? More specifically within the fascia are going to be these layers right here, so the endomysium, so endo means more inside, okay, so it surrounds the individual muscle fibers themselves, the cells, the perimysium, which surrounds the small bundles of fibers, the fascicles, which are bundles of muscle fibers, the epithelium, which is the outer layer of the fascia, again on epi there, and then the tendon, okay. A tendon is going to be a strong cord-like fascia that extends toward and attaches to the bone. Tendons are sometimes what we hurt seriously in sports injuries, other injuries as well. Tendons and ligaments, okay? And when these things are hurt, there's really a lot of pain associated with them and repair and so forth. More time than a broken bone typically take to recover from a tendon or ligament tear or complete tear of those would be terrible, okay? So the muscle fiber structure, one of the things within it are going to be the sarcolemma. A sarcolemma is going to be a cell membrane of a muscle fiber. A transverse tubule, or a T-tubule, I think is easier to say, is going to be the points where the cell membrane that penetrate deep into the interior of the muscle fiber. Here's a term we've seen kind of before, the sarcoplasmic reticulum. We've seen the endoplasmic reticulum in the cellular structure. So the sarcoplasmic reticulum, this is where there's specialized endoplasmic reticulum within the muscle fiber that stores calcium. If you see Ca, it's calcium. There's calcium stored in a lot of places, our bones, our muscles, and so forth, okay? Myofibrils, myo means what? What's MYO stand for? What are we talking about right now? Muscles, okay? So myo stands for muscles. Myofibrils are going to be long centrical structures in each muscle fiber, okay? They're composed of sarcomeres arranged in a series so they go end to end. And a sarcomere themselves are going to contract, they're contractile units formed of proteins, actin, and myosin. I told you there's a lot of pathophys with the muscular system, a lot of understanding why and how the muscles work. Okay? So this is going to kind of show you some of those layers or the parts of the muscle tissue as well. So looking at this biceps femoris here, your bicep muscle, this big part in between the two ends, that's going to be considered the belly. And that's where I went into further detail of what all consisted then of the muscle tissue and the muscle cellular structure. So this is going to be a picture of exactly what I just got into describing on the slide before. Alright, so within, I just told you on the slide before that a sarcomere was a contractile unit of the muscle. So it's what helps it contract. If our muscles are not contracting, they're not working. Okay? They have to contract. Right now, my eye muscles are contracting just to keep them open. Okay? Just to be standing here, some kind of muscles are contracting. Other parts of the muscle tissue or things that have to be there to make it happen are actin. Actin is a filament that extends inward from the Z-lines, where myosin are the thick filaments that lie between actin. There are myosin heads that make contact with the actin during muscle contraction. So this is all how a muscle contracts. The muscles actually contract because sarcomeres shorten. So the contractile unit shortens, and that's how it contracts. The sarcomeres shorten because actin and myosin filaments slide past each other. That is why it is called the sliding filament theory. The myosin heads make contact with actin when stimulated. There's a cross bridge formed and they swivel around, and the myosin heads rotate, pulling the actin towards the center. So again, the same picture again of how this works is showing you the muscle fiber, the outer covering there, the tendon, and the muscle contraction. Alright, so the role of calcium in ATP. What's ATP?
Energy.
Thank you. ATP is always energy. We start out by talking about ATP when we're talking about cells, and we're still talking about the cellular level here if we're really talking about ATP. But ATP, you should always immediately think of the energy. Okay? So, the role of calcium and ATP are energy for the contraction and relaxation of muscles. ATP, or that energy, is going to allow the actin and myosin to interact in the presence of calcium. So we have to have calcium for this to work, okay? When the muscle is relaxed, calcium is going to be stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum away from the thin and thick filaments. When the muscle is stimulated, the calcium is released from the SR. It causes the sarcomere, it causes the actin and myosin and ATP to interact and slide across. That is when the muscle contraction actually occurs. Okay? When calcium is pumped back into the SR, away from the actin, myosin, and ATP, the cross bridges are broken and the muscle relaxes. Has anyone ever heard of rigor mortis? Rigor mortis. What is it, Olivia? What is rigor mortis?
Is that the stiffness stiffness that you get after death.
Yes, so it is the stiffness that comes after death. That's how Olivia described it, and that is basically the truth, rigor mortis. So that muscle contraction and relaxation has stopped, or they're in a constant state, honestly, of contraction. Okay? So rigor mortis, when patients die, whether it's an animal or a human, okay, the production of ATP ceases or stops, so there's no energy being released. Therefore, so the deficiency of ATP prevents the detachment of cross bridges, so the muscle remains contracted and stiff, and it never gets to that smooth phase where it relaxes. It never gets to that phase where it's relaxing because the ATP has stopped. There's no energy coming in. Moving on here between and talking about muscles, the skeletal muscles, they have to talk with the nervous system. Okay? They have to get that stimulation, being able to communicate with the brain on what's going to happen next. Okay? So the nerves that are involved with the skeletal muscles are going to be the motor nerves. The motor nerve is a type of nerve that supplies the skeletal muscle with stimulation. The neuromuscular junction, or NMJ, is an area where that motor nerve meets the muscle fibers. Okay? The motor unit consists of a single motor neuron and muscle fibers that are supplied by a motor neuron. The recruitment process during this, the skeletal muscle and the nerves, is going to be a group of consequences of activation of additional motor units. The stronger that the force of the contraction develops, if many different motor units are stimulated at the same time. The weaker the force develops when fewer motor units are stimulated. And that's just pretty easy to understand. The more motor units are needed, the bigger the contraction it takes. So, what happens is the signal is chemically transmitted from the nerve to the muscle in order for the skeletal muscle to contract. The steps in the transmission of the signal across the NMJ, or the neuromuscular junction, are the following steps through here. I'm not going to go through each one of these steps because I feel like it is too deep in the pathophys of the muscular system. Okay? So this is how the neuromuscular junction communicates with the muscle in order for it to contract. Alright, continuing on here, still talking about that electrical signal or that nerve impulse. It travels down to the nerve to the terminal and causes the release of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, or ACH. Okay? The acetylcholine then diffuses across the neuromuscular junction and binds to the receptor site. This again is stimulating the muscle membrane and going through this nervous system in way more detail than at this point in our A&P, how it's too deep for what we need to go. Okay? So we're going to go through here a little bit. I'm going to see.
Muscle contraction is at the basis of all skeletal movements. Skeletal muscles are composed of muscle fibers, which in turn are made of repetitive functional units called sarcomeres. Each sarcomere contains many parallel, overlapping thin, actin, and thick myosin filaments. The muscle contracts when these filaments slide past each other, resulting in a shortening of the sarcomere and thus the muscle. This is known as the sliding filament theory. Cross-bridge cycling forms the molecular basis for this sliding movement. Muscle contraction is initiated when muscle fibers are stimulated by a nerve impulse and calcium ions are released. The troponin units on the actin myofilaments are bound by calcium ions. The binding displaces tropomyosin along the myofilaments, which in turn exposes the myosin binding sites. At this stage, the head of each myosin unit is bound to an ADP and a phosphate molecule remaining from the previous muscular contraction. The myosin heads release these phosphates and bind to the actin myofilaments via the newly exposed myosin binding sites. The two myofilaments glide past one another, propelled by a head-first movement of the myosin units, powered by the chemical energy stored in their heads. As the units move, they release the ADP molecules bound to their heads. The gliding motion is halted when ATP molecules bind to the myosin heads, thus severing the bonds between myosin and actin. The ATP molecules are now decomposed into ADP and phosphate, with the energy released by this reaction stored in the myosin heads, ready to be used in the next cycle of movement. The myosin heads resume their starting positions along the actin myofilament and can now begin a new sequence of actin binding. The presence of further calcium ions will trigger a new cycle.
So, as I tell you that I think that this pathophys of the muscular system is a little bit too far to us, it's important for, if you continue on your education, it's important for you to know some of this information, because as you get into your, whatever your work area may be, whether it's animals or humans, you need to sometimes understand why we need salt to move into the cell, or whether we need this fluid over this fluid, or whether we need calcium to do this. Does that make sense? So then putting it all together at the end, you think, I'm never going to use this pathophysiology. But really, depending on what you go into, if you're any type of physical therapist, occupational therapist, in whatever area you belong, then you are really going to have to take the muscular system, into a much deeper thought process, of course. But me, as an ICU nurse, I did have to apply it all the time, because I had to consider the electrolytes or the things that are needed. I know I need ATP. Is my patient in the ICU producing much energy? Probably not, right? So I have to consider that at all times. So putting it all together, and so that's why it's important to go ahead and talk about, okay? But you will dig deeper every single A&P course you take, and so forth. So that's why I say it's a little bit too much at this point to dig way, way into it, okay? So that talked about the neuromuscular junction, creating the energy, and so forth, and how the muscle contracts, basically. And then now we're going to be talking more about defining what a twitch is, tetanus, and recruitment, identifying the sources of energy for muscle contractions, kind of start the basis of the names of muscles, and list the actions of major muscles as well. The response of a whole muscle, okay? A partial muscle response, so a partial muscle response is where little force is needed, okay? Few fibers are contracting, but if we're getting any feedback at all, honestly, even if it's a slight bit, then that would be the partial muscle response. Any movement at all would be considered a partial muscle response. If more force is needed, additional fibers are going to contract. There's a process called recruitment that is where they use the additional muscle fibers to achieve a greater muscle force. Okay? Like I said, you need to remember, just to open your eyes is using force, using muscles to open your eyes. Okay? The muscle contracts weakly to lift a light load and more forcefully to lift a heavier load. We need that force to lift something heavier. A twitch, and you guys just sitting there, you're doing nothing at all, okay? And your muscles over here twitching, right? I mean, you're not moving at all. And something's twitching in your arm, something's twitching in your leg, you're like, oh man, I've been having this quite a bit. It's completely normal, okay? It is completely normal. A twitch is going to be the response of a muscle to a single electrical stimulus, in which the muscles contract and then fully relax. Those twitches are completely normal. Especially those ones when you're sitting still and so forth. Maybe it's just firing off some force and so forth. It doesn't mean that something is necessarily wrong with you when that happens. Tetanus is going to be defined as a sustained muscle contraction. So the muscle contraction is in a state that it cannot get out of. It's contracted tight, okay, if you have tetanus. And it is caused by repeated stimulation. So it's never losing that stimulation, and therefore the muscle is contracted in that area. Could this be bad? Tetanus. Very, very bad. Okay? So this is one of the things that we have an immunization for as well, is tetanus, because a constant state of contraction could be very bad depending on where the muscle is located. That makes sense? So that state of contraction could be very, very bad. But some tetanus is good because it's important for the maintenance of posture, so standing for a period of time, okay? This also, I made a false comment there. This same tetanus, I'm sorry, is not the same as the immunization one, but the muscle contraction of tetanus is going to be completely different. That tetanus, I don't know why I went there, with the immunization. So not related at all. Do not confuse it with the disease of tetanus, all right? But tetanus, just remember, is a constant state of contraction. And it can be caused by different disease processes, patients that are super septic, or are born with neuromuscular disorders and so forth, okay? If you hear the term tonus, it's commonly used in all of our fields. It is a normal continuous state of partial muscle contraction. All of us, if you're setting up right now, you're not laying down flat, okay, are having a normal state of tonus, okay? A normal continuous state of partial muscle contraction. All right, so this event, again, is going to move into ATP as energy, for the energy source for muscle contraction. But after that energy is consumed, it is replaced in 3 different ways. You need to remember that there is aerobic metabolism and anaerobic metabolism. Are going to be the main ones here. In aerobic, think aerobic exercise, you have oxygen present. Okay, you need the oxygen. Oxygen is present. That's going to be the main difference there. So in aerobic metabolism, oxygen is present. The pyruvic acid enters into the mitochondria. It's broken down into CO2, water, and energy. Large amounts of ATP or energy are formed compared to anaerobic, where it creates phosphate. So if you have lots of oxygen, you have lots of energy, okay, in aerobic metabolism. In anaerobic metabolism, the glycolysis happens here. So what that means is it's the breakdown of glucose, which is sugar, anaerobically without oxygen, okay? And meaning without or not, AN, meaning without or not. This generates very small amounts of energy, but glucose is where the energy source comes from in anaerobic. So no oxygen there. This is strictly coming from the glucose that is producing a little bit of energy. The example here of anaerobic metabolism is going to be glycolysis. A good example of this is that the glycolysis or anaerobic metabolism provides enough energy for like 30 to 40 seconds of intense muscle activity. That's it. So you have to have oxygen to continue the muscle activity after 30 to 40 seconds. Next up, another way of muscle contraction with ATP is going to be metabolism of creatine phosphate. So with this, it replenishes the ATP or the energy by resting the muscle. Okay? And then it uses some energy to make creatine phosphate in this phase. Creatine phosphate is a storage form of energy and is to be used to replenish the ATP during muscle contraction. An example is going to be like a brief 15-second intense muscle activity sustained by the ATP. So just another brief time frame. You really have to have oxygen to continue those muscles moving on. When we're going to dive in now to like labeling muscles and understanding where their words come from, where their names come from, and so forth, okay? So the terms come from the attachments, the groups, and the corporation together. So muscle attachments. The origin of the muscle, I don't know what that timer is for. The origin of the muscle attaches it to the stationary bone. You need to remember what the origin of the muscle is. The insertion point of the muscle attaches to the more movable bone. Okay, so stationary is origin, insertion is going to be the movable parts. So when you're thinking about the bicep brachii, or the bicep right here in our arm, and the scapula, which is what? We just had this bone, yeah, that wing-shaped bone, and the radius is going to be the insertion point on that. So within the different muscle groups, as we get into, before we start labeling them, you need to think about one of them being the prime mover. This muscle is responsible for most of the movement of the muscle. The synergist, which assists the prime mover, or is the helper muscle. The antagonist, which is the muscle that opposes that prime mover, or the action of another muscle. So this is going to be a picture picture of those things. The prime mover. So that's why these muscles are in groups. They have to have one another. Does that make sense? So one moves one direction, one moves the other. So the prime mover versus the antagonist. This shows you the insertion point on this radius bone here. The origin is going to be the more movable joint up here, up top on that ball and socket. Muscle overuse and underuse. So hypertrophy, hyper means above more than normal. Hypertrophy is going to be growth in response to overuse. So weightlifting, cardiac muscle due to hypertension. So what happens is we will grab a chest x-ray of a patient or of an animal. We'll grab a chest x-ray and the patient hasn't really ever had one done before, but they come in sick, something like that. We grab it more to look at their lungs, and we notice all of a sudden that they have this huge heart. Okay, well, it's cardiac muscle, right? Well, it's being overworked. And so if it's being overworked, it's typically from hypertension, which is high blood pressure. Okay? So that means that they have undiagnosed hypertension that's not being treated, and so their cardiac muscle is huge. Their heart is huge. Just like when you're lifting weights, you get bigger. Okay? Atrophy. Atrophy is going to be where there's wasting, muscle wasting. There's not any muscle actually, it's not building up at all, but it's actually decreasing in size, or it's atrophying, so it's wasting away. If you have a broken leg in that area, if you've ever had a broken bone, you know that that area that you haven't been using atrophies for a while, and you have to build that muscle back up. If you're a state in contracture, we talked about that tetanus is a state of contracture as well. But this is where there's the abnormal fibrous formation in the muscle that freezes the muscle in the flex position. So, for example, would be a stroke or cerebral palsy patients. All right, characteristics of skeletal muscles. So there are size. Vastus means huge. Maximus means large. Minimus means small. Longus means long. Brevis means short. What is our bottom muscle called, or butt muscle called? What's the whole term for it? Gluteus maximus, okay? So it's saying that it's large, okay? The shape of the muscle, a deltoid is going to be a triangle, latimus is wide, trapezius is a trapezoid, rhomboid is rhomboideus, teres is round, okay? So this is where the names of these muscles come from. There are also directions of fibers, so rectus is straight, oblique is diagonal, transverse is across, and circularis is circle. So mainly think about our eye there, okay? Location, so if we have the pectoralis, this is going to be our chest. The gluteus is our buttocks. Brachii is our arm. Supra means above. Infra means below. Sub means under. And lateralis means lateral. Okay? The number of origins that they have, or the number of sites to which it is anchored down on. So the biceps, triceps, quadriceps. So bi means what? Bi means what? 2. Tri means what? And quad means what? 4. So how many muscles do I have up here in my quad? 4. It's a group of 4. Thank you. So my triceps, how many is that? Triceps is on the back of your arm right here. 3. Okay, biceps is what? 2. All right. So it's the number of origins on these muscles. Also, the identification of the origin and insertion site. So you're looking again at names altogether. So sternocleidomastoid muscle. That's going to be the sternum, clavicle, and mastoid process of the temporal bone. Okay, that muscle that attaches to those. Also, you may be looking at the muscle action on how they're named. So an adductor muscle versus the abductor, a flexor, an extensor, and an elevator as well. So this is going to be a picture of the muscles in your book. I will have to look on your test for next week. I know that I don't have you label all these. I might have you label some, but I know that it's not all of these. Okay? So we will go through some of these together. Some of these you already know. You know the biceps. The triceps is going to be the back of the arms on the posterior view. You guys know the gluteus maximus, it seems. The gluteus medius is actually one that we give quite a few shots on the side of the hip, but we can also give it in that great big muscle there, the gluteus maximus as well. Also across here underneath kind of your quadricep muscles here, and included in there is going to be that sartorius, which goes right there in front of it. So that's going to be a group, a muscle within those quadriceps there. So your abs for, say, a lot of them are called obliques, okay? A lot of those muscles within that are called obliques. Your deltoid muscle, real big right here in your shoulder blade. Another great big large muscle is going to be this trapezius, just told you by shape, on the back there. I told you your calf muscle is called a gastrocnemius. The muscle back in behind here, behind the calf muscle, is going to be called your soleus and so forth. So I will let you know which muscles you're going to have to describe or label on the test, of course. Also, I told you a while ago when I was talking about the different terms that think about the eye muscles, the circular muscles, and so forth. So these are going to be more specifically the facial muscles. The zygomatic, guess what? That matches up with that cheekbone, that zygomatic bone there. The orbicularis oris around the mouth, around the eye. A buccinator, that's going to be a cheek muscle. A masseter across there. Okay. Sternocleidomastoid, this is the one we just talked to, comes up here to the temporal bone, comes down here to the clavicle, and the sternum, okay, are the insertion and origin sites. So it's really just kind of thinking about the bone that they attach to, or the location, or the shape or function of them as well. Included in the chewing muscles of the head are going to be the temporalis, which closes the jaw and is a fan-shaped muscle. Also that masseter, which closes the jaw, and works with that muscle to close it. Muscles of the neck here, that sternocleidomastoid, the trapezius in the back of the neck there, huge, huge muscle there. So muscles of the trunk, these are going to be very, very important muscles because they help with one of our main functions of life, which is breathing. So they are mainly going to be the intercostal muscles, but then there's one very important muscle that this picture doesn't really depict it as being that flat of a muscle, but it honestly is kind of like this flap there at the bottom of your lungs there, and it is the chief muscle in inhaling, okay, in inhalation. So intercostals means in between the ribs muscles, so that one kind of makes sense as well, and then the diaphragm on muscles involved in breathing. Muscles of the abdominal wall here, so those obliques that I talked about, also the transversus abdominis, the rectus abdominis, which runs up and down. There are also muscles of the vertebral column, muscles of the pelvic floor, and so forth. The muscles that move the shoulder and upper arm, we talked about the trapezius already, the serratus anterior, the pec major, which is going to be your chest muscles, the latissimus dorsi, which attaches the humerus to the axial skeleton, the deltoid, which is your shoulder, your rotator cuff muscles, there's a group of 4 there. Muscles in your arm, your biceps up top there, your triceps in the back, your flexor and extensor digitorum, which are going to kind of help with the finger movements and so forth. So down here on your forearm area. And then your extensors, which are muscles that lie along the posterior surface of your forearm or out here that attach to fingers and your thumb. This is showing you a picture of carpal tunnel syndrome, which can be a problem here with the median nerve and the muscles there in the wrist. Anybody who had parents that have had carpal tunnel syndrome or surgery before, quite a few. What they end up doing to help release this surgery is they do something called a trigger thumb or trigger procedure. And they just kind of, sometimes they go in and they'll clip that nerve, that median nerve, honestly, or can do some different things as well. It kind of depends on what all you exactly have going on. So that's usually the location is the underneath side of your wrist where that surgical site's going to be. And they're getting very, very good with these procedures. They've been doing it for a long, long, long time. Muscles that move the thigh, we talked about the, basically, the quadriceps in the front, but we haven't talked about the ones in the back. The gluteus maximus, of course, is on your buttocks area, but it helps move the thigh. The gluteus medius, minimus, and then those, the back of your leg muscles here as well, which are considered your hamstrings. The quadriceps, we talked about them a little bit. The hamstrings are going to be in the back, the gastrocnemius in the calf, and then the soleus back behind there. More specifically, in the front of your leg here, and then the back of your leg is this picture here. So tibialis, that is along your tibia bone, which is your larger bone in the front there, and so forth. So we've went up quite a bit. This is the last slide here. This talks about special muscles within your body. So those circular muscles up there being that kissing muscle, the smiling muscle, the zygomatic, what makes you be able to go crisscross, with your legs are gonna be the talar's muscle, the swimmer's muscle, the toe dancer's muscles, the gastrocnemius and the soleus, the praying muscle, the sternocleidomastoid, the Achilles tendon, and the hamstring. So that is the end of lecture for muscular system. Like I said, we could go much, much deeper than we even did with the nervous system and the muscular system going together with that contraction phase. But we will talk about it a little bit more when we go back to nervous system, but not a whole lot. All right.